Welcome back to the Real Nonsense Podcast. I'm your host, Toni Smith.
I'm Ronnie Heath.
I'm John Parsons.
This podcast is all about the nonsense that still exists in standard practice in PE that we wouldn't see in any other subject. And we aim to present the small tweaks that we can all make to everyday practice in PE that will turn something that seems like complete nonsense into fabulous, joyful learning experiences. Today's topic from the random generator is sport first curriculums.
Okay.
So I'm going to say no more. I'm going to ask Ronnie, I'm going to hand over to you, Ronnie, just to explain to us, this topic's come out of our generator. It's something that we talk about with our colleagues often. It's something that we debate at Real PE. So tell us, what do we mean by sport first curriculums?
Sport first curriculums. Well, they're absolutely a real nonsense, Toni. They don't, you mentioned in the intro actually how the real nonsense was recognising things that only happen in PE don't happen in other subjects, just as anyone else that would shape a curriculum around specific activities as opposed to what we're trying to learn through those activities. So sport first curriculum in the short sense is that all of the outcomes and thinking and planning and intent and implementation and impact are related to what happens in a specific sport, as opposed to seeing a coherent curriculum that's based on the learning, thinking first about the child.
Great. So what our children need first, in balance to putting that sport first. Now, let's have a think about why that might happen, why sport first curriculums might exist in our primary school settings. Got any reasoning behind that? I think I've got some thoughts and feelings around why that might happen. Any that you've got to add before I start?
I think if John was going to jump in, I would say that one of the issues is that because it's historic, first of all, nearly a lot of the real nonsense type practice will be historic. It'll be copying or practicing what we've always done in the past. And that even though we might be able to speak quite clearly about why that didn't work, we are sort of likely to copy it. We also feel comfortable talking about a specific activity, particularly if it's our preference. It's the one that we know about, if we can teach it. So that'll be a core reason for the intent.
Two great examples there, Ronnie. So it might be related to what we've known, what we've experienced ourselves. So that's the curriculum I had when I was at school, and I don't know an awful lot about this PE thing, so I'm just going to copy what I know. There's a little bit of teacher preference in there sometimes, isn't there? When you feel a bit underconfident, I know lots of teachers who then choose what they know because actually this is the place I feel confident.
And it is understandable a bit, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think two things to say. To pick up on the first bit, I think it's just to be really clear, we're not saying you should never do a sport, but I think that the
good clarification.
The unique,
John.
well, I think the placement that Ronnie made, or the clarity he was trying to bring, was that it's a servant, not the master. So actually, we can do it, but as Ronnie said, we need to have a clear reason why. So it's about what are the children learning through that sport. So servant, not master, is key.
Sport's not the villain here, is it?
No, it really isn't. And then I think in terms of why people do it, I think a couple of other things we might want to consider. One is, although the national curriculum for PE has sports in brackets, in other words, which is meant to mean they're optional, they're examples, I think in a lot of cases that's been missed by schools if they have to do them. And then the second one, which may be a little bit controversial, is we have obviously a focus around competition and extracurricular competition, school games being the big example. So you've then got potentially that coming into the mix where schools are maybe then starting to build their curriculums too much around their extracurricular competition, which, as we know, is typically, not in all cases, but is typically benefiting or preparing your curriculum around a small percentage of children.
That's a really good point, John.
Couldn't happen elsewhere, could it, Toni? So if you know you're building towards a competition, an external competition, whether the schools and the games, as John has just described, then I get it. And I think it's really common that people have the sports they choose as part of their curriculum to align in both primary and secondary education will be those sports. But just try and consider, would you ever see, if there was a spelling bee taking place among schools, would you imagine that they would collapse the literacy program and then actually would just get kids standing up like one at a time?
Spelling repeatedly to find who's the best at it to then take them to the spelling
and then give them some particular guidance on that. So just, again, we've just lost our core purpose of why we're doing it. If the core purpose is external, it's a competition somewhere else, it's a specific sport we like, as opposed to the learning that the child needs, then I think we're in trouble always.
I've had some lovely conversations with our brilliant primary colleagues when we've chatted, and I've added a bit of challenge to their why have you chosen your curriculum format to be like that, or why does your curriculum look like that? And actually, when they come back to how time squeezed they are, I'm giving some empathy and some rationale for why we sometimes align our curriculum to our competitive opportunities is that actually we've been squeezed from our 2 hours to our 1 hour. Our 1 hour is this. Mm-hmm. We don't have anybody on staff to take extracurricular clubs. Finances are difficult to get people. So when I talk, and you can see people's rationale for that, that's not an excuse. I'm just saying that we understand why sometimes those things happen. And our challenge is we've got to find a better way. We've got to find a way to be able to have our cohesive curriculum that is child first. And those activities are selected for what our children need. And we need another opportunity to offer that sport to align to the competitive opportunities we've taken our children to.
Yeah. And we'll come to solutions because I think it's really important. But it's just really get a sense of why it's such a problem. So if you imagine standard 6-week block of a specific sport or activity, okay, and of course we're making an assumption that we're not going to copy elite sport. We'll condition the rules, we'll make it much more flexible, and as we've already stated, we can and should use a whole variety of different activities, sports, conditions that suit our children. But just consider the idea that somehow your learning takes place in a 6-week block, and then you start another activity and learning starts again from scratch. And that you're good at one thing and not so good at another, and then you start from scratch. There's just no way that children learn that way. And an example of Greg Dry was giving me the other day was saying, imagine like your basketball curriculum, where you do 6 weeks of basketball, in which lesson 2 is dribbling, and somehow that's the only dribbling they get for that 6 weeks. But the next time they do it is a year later. Where in any of our understanding of learning do we think that you can develop, master a skill, apply a skill, review that process with one lesson a year? Whereas actually the element of ball handling and the skills that are required to engage in dribbling are really important, aren't they? But they're really important for netball and volleyball and for catching and throwing and volleyball and everything. So at some point of our curriculum planning, if we want our children really comfortable at ball handling, manipulating equipment, objects, all that sort of stuff, where does that happen? And of course, if it doesn't happen, it really will lead to some significant failure later.
And that journey should start as early as possible. Right. So that coherence is that has started in the early years if you're in a primary school. And it's not just done, it's continued and revisited and built on repetition throughout the year and through other opportunities. And there's that kind of connected flow as they move from year to year, and you can really see it when it's not that, when it's very sport first, because you'll observe children dropped into a sport for the first time where there's no connection through the curriculum, and what happens is it's a sink or swim. So the children that normally are having opportunities within that sport elsewhere are dominating that lesson, and then the children who have little experience and haven't developed some of the skills in order to have some success and access that activity are largely, and it's unintended, but are largely set up for failure. We'll have all seen those lessons, whether it's a tennis lesson with children unable to have a rally or have any success because those skills haven't been built over year on year,
week on week, month on month,
month on month, year on year.
Let's just do a little, before we move on to solutions, let's do a little summary. So you've both identified some really key points. So sometimes teacher confidence means that we have, or teacher underconfidence means we have teacher preference being more dominant than child need and learning need. We sometimes have the issue of time dictating that we think everything is squeezed into one place. So lots of our PE and sport offer gets squeezed into one place. That might be why that happens. John, you mentioned kind of that misinterpretation maybe of the national curriculum, that our activities are suggested rather than set in stone, but that misinterpretation means that we feel we have to put all those sports activities in that are named. Some of the reasons why we might see schools and subject leads or even teachers themselves choosing a sport first approach or a sport led curriculum. So we know it happens. We know we've discussed some of the reasons why it happens. What solutions have we got to that? And some whys? You've given some brilliant kind of rationale, but what solutions have we got to a sport first curriculum? What's the alternative? What should we be offering instead?
Well, I think you two are better placed, both in terms of working out in the field and John and his team producing those suggestions. So I think I'll try and clip it, sort of intro on as short, is to say, first and foremost, ask the question, what learning would I like my children to get? What things will they need to know? What thinking skills will they need to acquire? What emotional, social skills are required to be successful at this stage? What fundamental movement and generic skills are required for us to achieve the goals that we want? So you have a sense of what you'd like those children to achieve by the end of the year, by the end of their time with you at that school. And then you break it down from there and say, so where are they in that journey? And what do those children need right now? And effectively from that point, you can begin then to ask the personalised questions about various groups or individuals within that class.
And can you align activities then to meet those needs? So if you're building certain skills, can you then choose the activity that best meets that?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, be absolutely certain what the learning, what learning you want to see. What's the end goals for these young people?
Anything to add, John? Solutions-wise?
No, I think Ronnie's hit the nail on the head in terms of really mapping those journeys out. And I think there's a bit around sort of what's your vision for PE, for your school. So if it's to create a positive relationship with activity, it's then that's your starting point. But that and for every child, and then really breaking that down, as Ronnie said, into those sort of clear shared learning journeys. Obviously, that's something we did at the start, and we built it very much around developing fundamental movement skills, and then gradually being able to apply those fundamental skills in different ways. When they're young, it's thematic, cooperative, competitive, small-sided, modified activities and games, and then alongside that, those positive learning behaviours. And then off the back of that, you can then start to map out what that might look like for your school, because schools are different. They have different facilities, different, some schools can't do traditional sports because they don't have the facilities available.
You're so right. We didn't talk about that in our kind of rationale for why it happens, but we talked about time, but actually there's space and resource and subject knowledge. There's lots of things that play into why that might happen. So you're actually right. The kind of resource and the environment plays into that quite a lot. I just want to share with you, a good few years ago, I knew some really revolutionary and brave, innovative secondary schools in Somerset, where I live, who chose to change their curriculum. Really brave of a secondary, because we know that's often a sport-led curriculum in a secondary school. But some really brave ones who started to do work blocks of the learning intent that they wanted. So they chose this half term, we're going to really focus on resilience. The next half term, we're going to really focus on confidence. The following half term, we're going to do some leadership. And they totally overhauled their curriculum and put that as the intent for learning for all young people. And then they aligned their activities accordingly. And they got a lot of pupil voice involved in what activities would help to build those skills. And they even assessed the learning journey and the development of those skills. And I thought that was a brilliant thing, that they gave that a really good go. And I haven't spoken to them recently enough to know whether they've stuck with that. My feeling is I really hope they have done, because I thought it was a really brave approach. What you've also identified, John, is that Real P has two really clear learning intents of fundamental movement skills and learning behaviours, and that are about what we want our children to learn and what we need them to learn, and that all of the games and activities that have been developed and are written into Real P have been written to meet those learning intents and help children to develop that learning.
I think that's a really good overview. It's important, again, just in case the listeners are not picking up some of the obvious stuff that we might be thinking and not saying, is that we're from performance sport backgrounds and some elite sport backgrounds. So we're massively into sport. The other thing we should say is that we're not suggesting for a second this is a choice between achieving children's learning and being successful in sport. The two are completely connected. And perhaps for another real nonsense suggestion, can I make one? Why playing lots of sport doesn't get you very good at sport. Okay, which is
it's in the bank, Ronnie.
So we're actually not suggesting that In fact, there's I was only recently looking at a video of Steve Lowe at the Bishop Henderson School in Taunton, who doesn't have any kind of sport focus through his curriculum, and yet with the broader enrichment and everything else, the children are so good into their foundation skills, their fundamental movement, their knowledge, that they're actually performing exceptionally well across a whole range of sports, both individually and as a school. So I just want to make it quite clear that we will accelerate our ability to engage in all sorts of sports and activities and cycling and swimming if we can establish that really core foundation learning first. So when we think of child first, we're still heading towards far better opportunities to be stretched in the future.
And I think that's a misinterpretation that we've had a lot, is that people go, well, so real PE is not about sports then, and it's like, well, no, it is, but it's not sport first. So would you do sport with the year 6 group? I'd go, well, depends is the answer.
That's a good answer.
Because it depends on the facilities, where the children are at. Are they ready for it? What I wouldn't do is put the sport first, and then you've got the skills of the teacher to be able to potentially adapt that sport to meet the needs and deliver the learning that you've identified you want to develop. Now, the problem we get is that you'll see the children doing the sport, and you can see that the basic things you'd expect. So every child is included. Every child you could see is experiencing some success and challenge is not happening because the sport has been put ahead of the children.
The sport is dominant.
The sport is first. Now, if the children are ready for that sport, and that's the question, well, can they all, if it's a sending and receiving type sport, we tend to do more non-traditional modified activities because we know we work with a lot of primary schools, some of whom don't have access to those facilities. But if you look at a game like Endball, it is, at its heart, it's a sending and receiving game into a target, as is basketball and netball. It's simplified, it's modified. And within that, there's a clear learning focus around applying some of those fundamental skills and then looking at some of those behaviours alongside it. And then the ability and the ideas for the teacher to adapt that game to meet the needs of the children. So the answer is, well, can all the children access it? Can they all be challenged and included? And is there clear learning taking place? Well, if that's all, the answer to that is all yes, then why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do tag rugby or whatever
Absolutely.
it might be?
It's a brilliant place for me to summarise, if you're happy with that.
Absolutely.
So our real nonsense for today was sport first curriculums. We have absolutely established why that might happen: resource, time, confidence, misinterpretation of documentation, preference, all of those things. We have firmly established that sport is not the villain. That we are all come from a sport background. We all still coach sport and play sport. Sport is not the villain. But actually what we need to consider moving forwards, and the challenge to all of our educators out there, primary, secondary coaches, is that we really think about what the children in front of us need. We think about what's going to best help us allow them to learn what we want them to learn. And that we use sport as the servant for us and not the master. And we really put what the children need first before we select the activity that meets that need.
Perfect for me.
That's a great
Happy
summary.
with that?
Very happy with that.
Brilliant. So before we finish this Real Nonsense podcast, we are having some lovely interactions with our listeners who are getting in contact with us. So just a reminder to all of you out there, if you've got some real nonsense that you still see happen in practice that you observe or that you're even part of, if there's any real nonsense you want to bring to our door, then please get in touch with us. We've got some lovely people that we're going to invite on the podcast in the future, and we've got some great questions that have been posed by our listeners for future podcasts. So if you've got any real nonsense, please do get in touch. Thank you, Ronnie and John.
Thank you, Toni.
Thank you, Toni.
The